Hi, my name is Beth Hiley here for Board Game Geek. I'm here at Gen Con 50, the 50th anniversary of the origination of Gen Con, which first started in 1968. I'm standing with Mike Carr, who has been to every single Gen Con from the very beginning. Mike, what an accomplishment!
Well, thank you. I'm very gratified. I used to tell my friends, I think I'm the only person that's been to every Gen Con, and they say, yeah, big deal, so what? But now I'm getting respect, so I appreciate that, and it's very gratifying to have that claim to fame, minor as it may be, but it's a cool thing.
Well, and we're standing in kind of a special place, and why don't you tell us a little bit about this sort of doorway that we're standing in?
We're in the recreation of the front entrance at Horticultural Hall, which is exposition building in Lake Geneva, where the first Gen Con and the first several were held early in the history of Gen Con. And this is a full-scale reproduction in terms of the footprint of this perimeter. Mirrors the actual Horticultural Hall in Lake Geneva. It's a building that was, I think, put up about 1925, and the Flower Club in Lake Geneva uses it still to this day, and that's where Gary Gygax, being a block away from his home, had the first and some of the early Gen Cons.
And what we can do, too, is we'll put up a picture, too, of there's a little cornered off area to kind of give people a scope, and also for context too, where the building we're standing inside, the real building we're standing inside of, is Lucas Oil Stadium, which we are standing on the field where the Indianapolis Colts play. So that's for perspective. We're sort of seeing the originations of Gen Con, but also that the current one has expanded so much that we've taken over
a football field.
A professional football field right now.
As Peter Adkison, the owner of Gen Con, said, the geeks have taken over a football field. How cool is that? So, yeah, it's an amazing thing. And even being here in Lucas Field, as big as it is, this is just a fraction of the entire scope of Gen Con. So if anybody has yet to visit Gen Con, they should put this on their bucket list for future years.
Absolutely. Now, one of the reasons that they have built this recreation is because since it is the 50th anniversary behind us, we actually have an entire curated museum. Why don't you give us a few details about kind of what to see behind us?
Well, being the 50th anniversary, a couple of key people who are very interested as historians of gaming and of Gen Con, Paul Stormberg and John Peterson, collaborated to put together this Gen Con museum, and they've done a really bang-up job. And we're very fortunate to have so much memorabilia in one place, and because I don't think this is going to be recreated often, if again. So it's really been a treat to see some of the early stuff, middle, and more recent stuff, chronicling the history of this just amazing event.
Yeah, and so now I've sort of toured this, and unfortunately, as people watching this probably haven't been here, won't get to see it. But let's just talk about a couple of the major influences, because I don't think people realize how interconnected a lot of the role-playing, wargaming, board gaming, all of those, and how they've all tied into Gen Con, the event. That what we see, the thousands of releases we see every summer, the rise of the popularity at Essen, which is still the biggest in the world now for board games, a lot of that has a huge influence here from the early days of this event that we're standing in.
Absolutely. This event started largely as a board game and a miniatures event because it was predating role-playing game. So the first 5 to 10 years was primarily board gaming and miniatures, and happy to say those are still a part of the convention. The board gaming has increased in popularity in the last decade, certainly, if not before, and so there's more and more of that. I do want to mention that I attended a very interesting seminar put on by Matt Shoemaker of Temple University, who is an archivist, and he and his grad students have analyzed all the events from all the years, and they've created amazing bar graphs of the popularity of these different things vis-a-vis each other and so on. So he has this amazing database at Temple U, and he's encouraging anybody that's interested to use and take advantage of what they've compiled. So that's kind of a standing offer for people who want to delve further into this and see the trends of over the 50-year period and so on.
Now, one of the things I would love for, just as a story to kind of give people a little context, is the castle that dominated the hall, I believe in the 80s. Yep. If you could just give us a little 30-second of when people say, what castle, what are you talking about?
Yeah, the early 80s were really the heyday and the high water mark of TSR, and TSR owned Gen Con at that point.
Also owned D&D at that point.
Yes, and D&D was really at the height of its popularity. So at Gen Con, they pulled out all the stops, created a massive castle that was, I couldn't even quote the dimensions, but it was huge. And when you walked in, that was at the center of all the dealer area and kind of literally towering over all the other exhibitors and so on. So I think there was maybe not beyond the sense of awe, there was also maybe a little bit of resentment by the fact it was so dominant and such a big part of that. So that's definitely part of the Gen Con lore. I don't know whatever happened to that construction,
right?
But it was pretty huge.
Well, and I hear also a bunch of all the smaller indie publishers all got together and spent a couple $100 to buy Nerf guns one year and assaulted the castle.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Well, and this is the other little tidbit that I found out. So we're here in Lucas Oil, where the large part behind us off camera is the play space for Mayfair Games, which is at the moment stationed out in Illinois. And apparently they brought a catapult one year in the early days of Mayfair to also chuck things at said castle.
I wouldn't be surprised. And Mayfair's been a part of this convention like forever. So, and they're very well known, of course, for their railroad games, and there's huge tournaments, Puffing Billy tournament, and so on. So it's really a big deal. I do want to mention that one of the events that we have here is this Legends of Wargaming, which is a kind of a throwback, old school games from the 1970s and early 1980s, which have been quite popular, and that's also something that's featured at GaryCon in the spring every year in Lake Geneva. So if anyone who loves to play games should come to Lake Geneva, make a pilgrimage, so to speak, and come to GaryCon in the spring. That's in the honor of Gary Gygax, of course, and this year's going to be the 10th year coming up. And that thing has grown from a small 100, 150 person event like the early Gen Cons into today's 1,700 I think they had in 2017, and it's only going to get bigger next year. So that's a happy problem to have as it expands, and where are we going to put everybody, and how can we host all these events and stuff. But really, I would urge any listener or watcher of this who's not made a trip to Lake Geneva, GaryCon is your excuse to do so, and come and game, and you'll have a great time.
Yeah, because I hope people, kind of what I took away from this is the fact that Gary saw some miniatures, and from that led to a game that eventually evolved into D&D, and that as D&D became integrated with Gen Con and TSR eventually bought it, that in turn fueled all these other small RPG makers, which that in turn fueled more mini makers, which that in turn fueled card game makers, which that in turn gave birth to the early rise of Magic and all the collectible card game
wave.
Still
seeing that. I mean, the dealer area here is just stupendous, I guess would be the best way. It takes hours to go through the dealer area, and that's if you keep moving, and it's hard to keep moving because there's so many interesting things to stop and see, and people to talk to, and this is just a remarkable event. So I've just consider myself a very fortunate person to have been at all of these events, and I hope to come to many more.
And it's funny, for being literally a competitive industry, we are very we love to learn from each other. We love to share with each other. Compared to a lot of in other industries, we are remarkably cooperative, and I think that really shows that this is look at where 50 years has gotten us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's based on a common love of gaming, whether it's computer gaming or board gaming or dice gaming or role-playing or miniatures or whatever it happens to be. There's a commonality of interest and understanding, because this was very much a niche sort of interest for so many people for decades. It's really taken a generation for this to come to full flower, be socially acceptable and that sort of thing. And just the fact that we're seeing more females involved in this and at the convention, unfortunately that took a generation to happen, but people were playing role-playing games, and they're inviting their daughters to participate. And at college, guys would invite some of the female members of their community to participate. And so again, it took a lot longer than it should have, but we see a lot more female participation, and that's only a good thing. So.
Well, Mike, I really appreciate you giving us a couple minutes to talk about a 50-year perspective of what you've seen and where it's gone, and hopefully what another 50 years will bring on. Thank you so much for being a part of the history of Gen Con and the history of gaming.
I'm happy to do it, and I would urge anybody that's never been to Gen Con to come and enjoy yourself. This is great. It's the best 4 days in gaming. That's their slogan, and it's true.
Thank you again.